I'm Park Howell, and welcome to the Business of Story.
I thought it was just a stupid picture of a pig in the ocean. But after hearing that story, I had to have it. Now I wasn't just buying a picture. I was buying a story. Story literally made the picture worth more money to me.
That's what businesses are about. People buy brands. People buy stories much more than anything else.
I work with a lot of big enterprise companies, but let's just say I always tell folks, drop the PowerPoint, close your laptops, start with your story.
If you want people to get engaged and you want people to act, you have to tell them an emotionally powerful story. That's with great characters, it's with uncertain outcomes, and it's with high stakes and drama.
All business strategy is a story.
The human mind is a story processor, not a logic processor, states social psychologist Jonathan Haidt. We use stories as the mental structure that shape the way we see the world around us. So why, oh why, do we default to yammering on and on about data in our communications when it is the drama that our audiences emotionally connect with? The drama that moves them to action. On today's show, we'll discuss how data-driven campaigns are killing the Democratic Party and how you can keep it from happening to you and your brand. With us is a highly decorated 30-year veteran of the direct mail industry who works solely with the Democratic Party, Dave Gold. Dave is the founding partner of Bouchard Gold Communications. Clients have included Senator Joe Biden, Governor Ann Richards, Congresswoman Betty McCollum, plus attorneys general, coalitions, causes, propositions, and initiatives. Dave has seen it all. And the most troubling recent trend is this reliance on big data, which is leading to micro-targeting and micro-thinking without a compelling, overarching narrative for audiences to connect with. On today's show, you'll learn about the importance of communicating values to stir emotions that drive behavior towards your brand. How Republicans are trumping Democrats with their compelling use of narrative and how you can do the same to your competition. And how a Christmas tree can be a reminder to you about the foundational nature story in all you do. So let's get started with Dave Gold on this edition of Business of Story. It's great to have you here. Our mutual friend, Dr. Randy Olson, the author of Houston, We Have a Narrative, and my good buddy that came on Business of Story the day after the election and talked about Trump's narrative intuition and how we now have a brander-in-chief sitting in the White House, sent me your article in Politico, and I loved it. It's called, the title of it came out February 9th, Data-Driven Campaigns Are Killing the Democratic Party. So I think this is so timely right now. Well, giving everything that we're watching happening on Capitol Hill. I just literally came back myself from D.C. working with the Air Force out there last week. And it's just fascinating to me about what is happening around big data, how it is commanding so much attention in our communications and targeting audiences and trying to get people to pay attention. And yet what it seems like it's doing is taking away from the drama that we need to be communicating, the storytelling to connect on emotional levels. And your article just further underscores that. So what I want to do in today's show is compare what's happening with data, how it's killing the Democratic Party, and how our listeners can make sure that it doesn't kill their brand and their enterprise and what they need to do to overcome that. And I'm just so happy to make your acquaintance, Dave, because you have really a remarkable background, both in data and storytelling and marketing. And why don't you give us a little bit of the background? I think let's start with your graduate studies at MIT. And where did those take you?
The graduate studies at MIT in political science took me out of the field of political science and ultimately drove me into the field of actually working on campaigns. I've always believed since that experience at MIT that political science is an oxymoron, as science by definition controls for a single variable and campaigns exist in a multivariate world. I appreciate the use of data and have for the last 30 years in the work that I do, but for over 30 years have been working on democratic campaigns and progressive causes doing direct mail around the country.
And is your specialty direct mail?
Yes, we do direct mail, not what's called persuasion direct mail. I started in fundraising direct mail back in the mid-'80s, but really since the early 90s have exclusively done what's called persuasion mail, trying to get people to vote for candidate A or against candidate B, or for a ballot initiative, or to become engaged in a public affairs effort, contacting a legislator or a local public official in support of one cause or another.
Isn't all direct mail, though, in one way, shape, or form, persuasion direct mail?
It is. It's used as a term of art for self-mailers, much more visual, sometimes called television in the mailbox, as opposed to what had existed before, which was letters and envelopes. And while fundraising still is letters and envelopes with reply cards and reply envelopes, persuasion mail as a term of art is not driving a response in the mail as much as at the ballot box.
So you're driving behavior change, mindset change, and behavior change at the ballot box.
Exactly. And I often say that if you don't change somebody's behavior with a program of mail, then you've killed trees for no purpose. You put your finger on exactly what we're trying to do. If we're already talking to people who are going to vote and going to vote for us, then that's not effective targeting. If we're talking to people who are not available to us, it's not effective targeting. But people who are undecided, who might go one way or another, or would be for us but haven't decided whether or not to vote, that's whom we're trying to reach. But the problem is that we Democrats have allowed micro-targeting to become micro-thinking. We end up talking to fewer and fewer people as the targeting becomes finer and finer, and having less and less to say. And that goes to your podcast and its fundamental purpose, which is storytelling. And I've been on a soapbox since the mid-'80s about storytelling in campaigns. Since 2010, when Democrats learned all the wrong lessons from Obama's victory, my battle has principally been against data-driven campaigns, as the article in Politico headlined. But it's a battle that even precedes that, when for years Democrats' communications focused on issues, poll-tested issue bullet points, each presented in its own silo. And I would have consistently argued that that doesn't tell a story and that doesn't emotionally connect with voters. What we have to do is find a narrative thread that connects the different issues. And my favorite metaphor for doing so stems from when I first went to work in direct mail. And my mentor, I first went for my first assignment and sat down in his office with my legal pad at the ready and took notes diligently as he told me the structure of a resolicitation letter, a letter to people who had previously given to the candidate, U.S. Senator we were working for, and going back to them and asking for additional funds. And so at the end of his laying out the structure of the letter to me, I asked, and what issues should I focus on? And he said, issues, tissues. The issues for him were entirely secondary. And he presented the metaphor that issues are to a campaign message what ornaments are to a Christmas tree. Ornaments make the tree more festive, but without a tree, you don't have a Christmas tree, no matter how many ornaments you have. Issues can advance a campaign story, but without a narrative frame, a campaign doesn't have a message, no matter how many issue ads or position papers it puts forward. And I've been on that soapbox ever since, first arguing against emotion-free issue bullet points presented in silos, and for the last several years since 2010, arguing against data-driven campaigns.
So you really, data-driven campaigns is at the heart of what you do. First and foremost in direct mail, I would imagine, because you need that data to understand your audience, where they are, what their mindset is, and so forth. But you simply use the data to inform then your storytelling. And I think of, a great Democratic storyteller, at least as a consultant, with James Carville, when he told Clinton, was their main theme? It's the economy, stupid. That, I suppose, was their Christmas tree, to borrow from your metaphor. Is that right? And then they hung the ornaments on that?
I would argue that in that campaign, it's the economy, stupid became the best known of 3 points that they had. I think the narrative was the first point, which is change versus more of the same. Number 2 was it's the economy, stupid. And number 3 was, and don't forget about healthcare. That was their 3 bullet points that they kept focus on every day. To me, their Christmas tree, their narrative frame was change versus more of the same. And they used the economy and healthcare as their 2 primary issues to drive that narrative forward. I agree with you that in direct mail, when I do, data is very important. Targeting is very important. But we use it, or attempt to use it, to focus the message, to try to make sure we're talking to something as close as we can to the right subset of people. And we don't, I'm not a Luddite. I don't think that data has no role. But at the end of the day, if you don't connect with people, if you don't make them change their behavior, and that requires connecting emotionally, then it doesn't matter how excellent your targeting is, you will not have changed their behavior. So that's why I believe in message-driven, data-informed campaigns. The driving force has to be the narrative, and data helps focus that narrative.
So you had mentioned earlier about micro-targeting, which we can, of course, do now with our big data, has led to micro-thinking. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Sure. If you have a different message for each tiny subset of people that you can identify, it is unlikely that you're having effective messaging. If your database and its refinements and your algorithms allow you to identify left-handed Jewish women, having a separate and distinct message set for left-handed Jewish women is unlikely to be a compelling message. And if it is a compelling message, more compelling message than your basic campaign messaging, then you got a real problem with your basic campaign messaging. If you allow narrowing and narrowing and narrowing of your universe to such an extent that you're not talking to a sufficient number of people to impact the outcome of the election, then you've allowed data to get in the way of winning a campaign. And the micro thinking that I speak of goes back long before big data was driving it. If you're only presenting issues in silos, here's your mailing on jobs, here are your 2 mailings on healthcare, and here's your mailing on the environment, and they have nothing to do with each other. Not only do you fail to get any cumulative effect, you also have no narrative. Each issue is presented in a non-narrative context, talking about Randy Olson's frame. It's an and way of presenting information, as opposed to having a frame where you have a structure that allows the different issues to advance an underlying message rather than be the message themselves. And going back to the Clinton campaign, which I believe change versus more of the same was the message frame. And then each issue, as they talked about it, whether it was the economy, stupid or smart, or healthcare or any other issue, always was through the prism within the frame of change. And Obama did that in 2008, where hope and change was not just a slogan, but a message frame through which all messages were presented.
Was that his Christmas tree?
Yes. Hope and Change was his Christmas tree, just as Change versus More of the Same was, I believe, the Christmas tree for Clinton.
I think about this micro-targeting versus micro-thinking, and I think it's a really important point to underscore as brands start taking in more and more data to try to understand. So I was trying to think of a metaphor, and as you were talking, Dave, I thought of my own family that I grew up in. I'm one of 7 kids, and we all have distinct, different interests. We do different things. We are all across the board. But our parents raised us all under this same ethic, family ethic of honesty and hard work and morality and whatever. It's not like they picked out each of our own particular interests and just told us a story that would relate to us. And that's how we viewed our family. We have this one overarching story that is the Howell family. We call it the Happy H. My father calls it the Happy H. But we all, in our own different ways, how we approach life, completely different, from one to the other, have our own stories that we live into. So that's sort of what you're talking about. If it be a politician or a brand, if you were micro-targeting and you were just firing stories at what the data tells you about these individual audiences and not paying attention to the meta story of what is the brand ethos or what is the politician's ethos, then you have nothing to hang all of those little stories off of.
Absolutely. The values-driven messaging that you speak of with your family is the same for a candidate, same for a product or a service. So what is the value that you're connecting to? Because values connect to emotions, and emotions drive behavior. One of the fundamental problems, and I think contributing to why Democrats behave the way they do and lose so often, is that I believe we tend to operate off a model of human behavior that emerges out of the Renaissance. That the human brain is a thought processor, and if you win enough competitions on the issues, as people process those issues, you'll get their vote. Whereas Republicans, I think, better understand that human beings, make decisions with their gut, using emotion, and then use their brain to find ways to justify the decision they've already made, to rationalize the decision that they've already made. And they communicate better on an emotional level than as a rule, Democrats do. Now, that's not all Democrats, and that's not through all time. I was just watching Mario Cuomo's keynote speech from the 1984 Democratic Convention and Barack Obama's 2004 keynote speech. And both of those speeches spoke eloquently to values and connected their personal story or other stories to a basic values frame and an emotional frame. And Cuomo spoke of the wagon train headed west to the frontier, and that Republicans, he said, believed that to make it to the destination, they had to leave some of the elderly, some of the infirm by the side of the road. But Democrats instead believed that we had to keep the whole family on the train, and we had to reach out to bring others onto the train, to bring others less fortunate or more immigrants or other ethnicities or races. And I believe in that. That captures well why I am a Democrat and have worked for progressive causes all my life. But in looking at it and trying to break it down, the hero was not the wagon master. The hero was not the scout of the train, but rather was the ordinary families on the wagons who were keeping the family aboard and reaching out to bring others on board. And too often candidates make themselves the hero, where it really should be the voter. Mm-hmm. And in that metaphor, the voter was the families, the ordinary families, the ordinary voters on the wagons, and the candidates, the scout, trying to assist and mentor and guide the hero to the destination. And the candidates who make it all about themselves and not about the voter tend to do less well. And I know your audience includes non-politicos. I mean, selling a product or a service is really selling something not about you, not even about the benefits of your product or service, but what the service or product can do for the consumer. Mm-hmm. It's trying to put yourself in why would somebody be interested in this product rather than why you are excited about your own product. It's putting the benefits to them rather than from your perspective.
Right. And Dave, what I ask people to do, there's your driveway alarm. I hope you don't have a Republican sneaking up on you there.
No, that's my wife returning.
But what I ask people to do to get that frame shift away from the brand and towards the audience is just ask yourself, in your stories, do you say this? It's not what you make, but what you make happen. What you make is very brand-centric focus, but what you make happen is customer focus. Is what do you make happen in their life? And I want to go back to this idea that you had talked about the human mind as a story processor, not a logic processor. Mm-hmm. Yet we are all trained to lead with logic, and it's not how people buy. People buy with their hearts and justify their purchases with their heads, as you also said earlier. And yet, and I imagine since you do so much work in the political field with Democrats, and you deal with lots and lots of smart people, but why do you think is it that we turn out so many brilliant people that lead with logic versus emotion when they're trying to persuade people?
That is a difficult question. I think it may be in part that newer generations of consultants emerge from data-driven backgrounds, pollsters especially, and fewer of the media consultants were filmmakers. The first generation of media consultants, at least on the Democratic side, had been filmmakers and brought those skills, those storytelling skills, to the work they did. There are a few such consultants left, and there are a few old guys like me who come from a storytelling background, doing mail, but a lot of the consulting world and most of the campaign committee world does not have storytelling background. And they look at storytellers as old school, old fashioned. In my article, I speak to the fact that Bill Clinton thought that the campaign needed better messaging on the economy.
Hillary's campaign,
precisely.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And he couldn't get through to anybody in Brooklyn where Hillary's campaign was headquartered. Mm-hmm. Their campaign was run by an algorithm. It was a data-driven campaign. They were very proud of it. They considered Bill to be old school, storyteller, and he couldn't get through. So if he couldn't get through to Hillary's campaign, there was precious little hope that any of the rest of us could.
Well, I know James Carville attempted it. I know Dr. Randy Olson attempted it on a couple of occasions we covered in his segment. And so, yeah, they got in their own way.
Randy understands far better than I the science behind why storytelling works. And James is one of the very best storytellers we have on our side. Yeah. Often when Democratic consultants get together and swap war stories, they're basically telling stories about Carville because he's just one of the more entertaining storytellers we have. But they couldn't get through.
The man can own a room. Well, I tell you what, Dave, I'd like to take a break. And when we come back, I want to talk about Trump and his use of story and his narrative intuition and how he ultimately trumped the Democrats and won the highest seat in the land by, of course, a very slim margin, didn't even win the popular vote, but his narrative certainly rang much truer than Hillary's did, at least for a number of voters. So let's cover that right after these messages. I was watching TV last night, and okay, I'll admit it, I was watching CNN just to see what in the world the Donald was up to now, when a 30-second TV spot caught my eye. It opens with a young lady resting comfortably in bed on her Tempur-Pedic mattress. Now, you know it's a Tempur-Pedic because they have a small little logo watermark in the bottom left-hand corner of the spot. But then the story really gets going. They cut to footage of her shredding the slopes on her snowboard as she describes the accident that took her right leg. That's right, she's missing her right leg. We're introduced to Michelle Salt, a Paralympian snowboarder from Calgary, Canada, as she cuts through the scene on her board, decked out in winter gear with an exposed bionic-looking leg for all the world to see. Michelle recounts her story of how the support of her Tempur-Pedic mattress helped her recover and get her back on her feet again. I think Tempur-Pedic did a wonderful job of not selling what they make, but what they make happen through Michelle's story of recovery and redemption. Not a single product feature or function was mentioned, just pure, raw emotion that suggested Tempur-Pedic was and is there for Michelle, communicating they're there for me and you too. So, for raising their brand out of the morass of mattresses with this compelling story, Tempur-Pedic earns my Story Marketer of the Week. If you'd like to see the spot, just go to the show notes. And if you have an example of a brand doing a great job with their story marketing, please let me know. Just shoot me a note at park@businessofstory.com. People come to me and say, Park, we've got a great business model. We're making money and we're growing fast, but we don't have our brand story straight. And then I ask them what their biggest pain points are, and they tell me, well, our growth is requiring us to add a lot of new people, and now we don't have everyone pulling in the same direction. Plus, other companies have taken notice of our success, and we don't have a brand story that differentiates us from them. They also tell me that when their bankers or potential investors show up and ask them about their brand story, they don't have a clear narrative to share with them. In fact, that's often the most embarrassing part of not having their brand story straight. So if this sounds like you can start getting your story straight right now by downloading your own Business of Story how-to guide. I take you through the 10 proven steps of the story cycle system, complete with short explainer videos, so I'm there with you every step of the way. This guide will help you define the fundamentals of your authentic story. It'll help you clarify your number one position in your market to differentiate you from your competition, declare your unique value proposition, map your customer journey, and define your brand purpose, among other things. The Story Cycle System has helped companies like yours grow by as much as 400%. So put the Business of Story workbook to work for you and create epic growth for your enterprise and your people by crafting a story they can all live into and prosper from. Story on. Welcome back to Business of Story, and our guest today, Dave Gold of Bouchard Gold, coming to us from what? Taos, New Mexico.
I'm in Taos, New Mexico. I get to do it from here in the mountains because my name's on the door.
You gotta love it.
My partner is Steve Bouchard, is in Old Town Alexandria, Virginia, and the company's actually headquartered in Austin, Texas.
Oh, okay. And you guys really focus on the Democratic Party and pretty much all political matters in direct mail and moving people to action?
Well, we Democratic candidates, committees, labor unions, progressive causes, and we do direct mail.
Mm-hmm. So what was it about Trump, in your opinion, now after writing this article about data-driven campaigns killing the Democratic Party? What did he do that so trumped the Democrats?
Well, he had a message. Whether it was a great message or not, it was certainly a better message than the Clinton campaign, which had, if you were going to say that she had a message, it was, in essence, vote for me and I'll be the first woman president, violating one of the first rules of campaign messaging. It made it about her, not about the voter. I'm with her, further reinforced that. She had a good slogan, Stronger Together. That was fine. She had, ironically, a narrative frame that could have advanced that slogan into a message. And It Takes a Village, her 96 book. But instead of using that as a frame through which issues were presented, she presented a whole series of issues as emotion-free position papers without any connective thread tying them together. In contrast, Trump had a message, had a slogan, "Make America Great Again." Randy argues that actually is a story in and of itself. My own take on his message was that he was speaking to people and saying to them, the elites have been treating you poorly. Elites, whether they be media elites, political elites, Republican and Democratic alike, business elites on Wall Street, celebrities from Hollywood, they've all condescended to you, looked down their nose at you, and you've been getting the short end of the stick. And if you vote for me, I'll treat them badly. And if nothing else, you'll get the psychic pleasure of seeing me do that, and you might even get something out of it in the process. And I think that was a very emotionally resonant chord with an awful lot of voters.
So my question is, how can he pull that off? You think about it, at least from my viewpoint, you could couch him as the exact same elite, a celebrity elite being, a reality TV star who does nothing but fire people. I mean, talking about being treated poorly. He's like a Wall Street elite and a businessman, who actually you hear story after story after story of him not treating vendors well and leaving people high and dry and so forth. So what always surprised me about him is how could that story work for him and not stick to him?
Because he presented it, and no counter story was ever presented. The Clinton campaign never presented those stories of ordinary folks being stiff, waiters, bartenders, carpenters, plumbers, all getting the short end of the stick from him. That would have been a compelling way to say, hey, he's not on your side. Look at how he treated these people. That's what the Obama campaign did in 2012 to Romney. All the people he had treated poorly as a businessman. Instead, he was allowed to go out and say, listen, I know how these people look down their nose at you. I live among them. I know how the game is rigged. The system is rigged against you. I benefited from that. And I'm willing to put all of that aside, and I'm not going to take a penny. And I'm going to simply be in there for you, because who better than I to know how the system is rigged, because I was a part of it. He was able to present that and get away with it because nobody ever challenged him on the fundamental underpinnings of what that messaging was. He used his celebrity, and we live in a celebrity-driven culture, a celebrity-driven narcissistic culture. So who better to emerge from that culture than a celebrity narcissist? The two things most singular about our culture today, to me, is reality TV, phony drama, amped up, hyped, and the selfie, which is a wonderful expression of narcissism. And he's reflective of both of those threads of American culture.
Yeah, I guess Twitter is kind of his selfie account, isn't it? I mean, have you ever seen anybody with that much power being able to manipulate the stock exchange and world order by, a 140-character tweet?
I mean, if we get into it deeply enough, then my doomsday view of the likely future of the republic will probably depress your listeners entirely too much.
Well, let's brighten it up then. So we know what happened. We saw it in action. We have dissected it quite a great deal. Now, what does it mean to brands? So brands need to take a deep breath, step back, and say it's not about them. It's about their customers, first and foremost. You have data to help you inform who those customers are and what they want and how to communicate to them on their terms, not the brand's terms, and ultimately needing this overarching narrative thread that truly communicates and expresses the ethos of the brand. And it is from that meta story that all other stories should be birthed.
I absolutely agree. And as most candidates are too close to their own story to understand they need to step back and make it about the voter rather than themselves. Often, I believe in the business world, people are too close to their product or service to take that step back and think about it from the perspective of their customer. One of the problems on the political side in selling the importance of storyteller to a member of Congress is they all already won their race. They're members of Congress, and most candidates for Congress have won a race. They're state legislators or mayors or such. And they think of themselves as great storytellers. And I suspect most business people, when it comes to their product or service, think they are great storytellers about their product or service. In fact, neither is generally the case because they're too close. And they're thinking about it from their perspective, not the voter's perspective or the customer's perspective. Conversely, when it comes to data, politicians hire experts, alleged experts, who can supposedly provide magic formulas that can deliver victory. And that's why micro-targeting gets enhanced and message development gets sidetracked. And I suspect this is as true in the business world, although it is not my principal field of expertise. But I suspect there are a lot of business people who think they know the story of their product very well or their service very well, but they don't really know the data side of it nearly as well. So when the IT department comes up with new magic dust that's going to, instead of delivering victory to the candidate, deliver sales to the company, they're all in buying the pixie dust. But the fact of the matter is, just as in campaigns, if you're not telling a story that moves people, an emotional story that moves people and changes their behavior, doesn't matter how good your data is. In the world of business, if you're not telling an emotional, compelling story about the benefits your product or service can deliver for the potential client or consumer, it doesn't matter how good your micro-targeting is, how clever your IT department has allowed you to refine your targeting. If you don't have an emotionally compelling story, you're not going to change people's behavior and you're not going to make the sales.
So let me back that up with some data, actually. I'm just, again, going back to your article in Politico. The loss of 63 seats in control of the House to the Republicans, the loss of 11 seats in control of the Senate, the loss of 13 governorships, the loss of over 900 state legislative seats, and control of 27 state legislative chambers. That is the cost of leading with data that the Democrats have suffered when the Republicans have just done a better job of out-storytelling them by using emotion to rally their troops and get folks to do the vote. Now, you and your firm did seemingly the impossible, at least in my mind. And I'm looking if you would tell us the story about Harris County, Texas. So I'm assuming Texas, like Arizona, is a pretty right-leaning state, to say the least. And yet, over the course of three different races, you guys have, in this particular county, have had a tremendous impact for the Democrats. Can you tell us that story?
Sure, be happy to. We've been a part of a program for the last 3 election cycles in Harris County, which includes Houston and has a population larger than 25 states. And there, our slice of the program was persuasion mail to Hispanic voters. And through a combination of empowerment messaging and values-driven messaging, with a repetition rarely seen in programs aimed at base voters, which usually gets short shrift compared to the frequency and number of mailings set to swing voters. But we've helped drive low-propensity voters who model use of data, but who model as unlikely to vote, though were they to vote, would be likely to vote for Democrats. We've helped drive low-propensity voters to turn out in numbers that mirror high-propensity voters. And this last November, the program it was determined that what we needed to do was drive straight ticket voting, which we had won by a couple of 3,000 votes.
What do you mean by straight ticket voting?
Texas is one of the states where you can simply go in and check a party, and that means you vote right down the ballot from president all the way down to all the local offices as well, vote for that party.
So I just tick off Democrat, and every Democrat who's up,
every Democrat on the ballot is getting your vote.
Okay.
We had lost the straight ticket voting in 2014, won it narrowly in 2012. And part of the goal of our program was not simply the presidential, Texas, a red state, it was unlikely we were going to win statewide, but it was the countywide offices, again, to a population bigger than half of the states. And we ended up collectively driving and winning the straight party results by over 70,000 votes. That played a significant role in Democrats winning every contested race in the county for the first time in a generation, including the district attorney, the sheriff, county clerk, and 30 judicial races.
And how did you use storytelling to do that?
It was a combination of looking at the research, finding out what mattered to people, and doing that through a sense of empowerment to the voters and the responsibility, telling the story that they were responsible for protecting the community. In the research, protecting the community was more salient than the fact that Donald Trump hated the community. It was the threat of what he would do to the community that was much more salient to people.
So the value we're connecting was this community value. We got to protect ourselves. We got to look after one another. And so you've got the social proof involved. But
if we don't, that we have to stop him, and that the best way of stopping him from dividing our families and dividing our community, which he, and I would parenthetically note, is now doing, the best way to stop him is to vote against him and all his allies. And that connected to a message about voting the straight party ticket, that was how one could best help protect our families and our community.
So was your Christmas tree the protecting the community narrative?
Yes, absolutely.
And then on that, you ornamented, you decorated. I don't think it is.
We just made one up.
But then you hung the issues off that tree, so that you have that overall overlying narrative, and then you brought in sub-stories, for lack of a better term, that talked about the issues, but you made them emotionally compelling to your audiences, not just a numbers-driven issue program.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it also, in terms of communications to base voters, was very different than what Democrats typically do. Often the messaging is one of civic duty. Martin Luther King said, "Let us march to the polls." So on Tuesday, let us march to the polls. Now, a kind of messaging I stopped doing in the early 90s when going back and deconstructing the results after elections, as best I could determine, it wasn't working. And my theory has been that it is a message that works to regular voters. They have a sense of civic duty. Whereas low propensity voters don't. And they don't vote simply because they don't know that it's election day. On a general election, presidential, gubernatorial election year, they know it's election day. On a special election for a bond or something local, they might not, and that becomes important. But on a big, major election, they don't vote because they don't see themselves as having a stake in it. They don't think it's worth their effort. And so what you have to do is persuade them that there's something that they should care about enough to change their behavior. And that requires some repetition, just as any messaging does. And it requires it being presented in an emotional way, which we have worked to do for many years. And it combined it with one other element here, which was an empowerment message, which emerged from some data that indicated that up to a third of registered voters, low propensity voters, didn't realize they were still registered. And this first came out in 2012, when people who had voted in 2008, hadn't voted in 2010, didn't realize they were still registered to vote. And informing folks that they were still registered to vote was an important component of letting them say, well, hey, I should pay attention to all the rest of this messaging, because if you're not registered, why pay any attention to it at all? There's nothing you can do. But if they were registered and registered at this address and they were empowered to do so, they then would pay more attention to the persuasional messaging, the emotional storytelling that we attempted then to do.
So, Dave, in your experience with all of this about, in persuasion, marketing, messaging, storytelling, what are the 2 or 3 tips you might offer our listeners to say, look, at when you are thinking about your brand, be it in direct mail, inbound marketing, whatever, don't make these mistakes? Or what is it that you could empower us to do?
Well, regardless of the kind of communication, whether it's in mail, on TV, online, it's all press releases, whatever. Tell a story, tell an interesting, emotional, narrative story. I would refer you back to Randy Olson's narrative structure that he presented the day after Election Day.
Which is the and, but, and therefore, the ABT.
A versus AB, and versus and, but therefore, or
right.
And, but so. Mm-hmm. I mean, people rarely use the word therefore. It's really the word so that I've heard. And I've analyzed a position paper, for example, of the Clinton campaigns, which used the word and over 100 times and the word but only 7 times. A perfect example of the and boring position paper, as opposed to a more interesting structural approach to a narrative story. But it's got to be interesting, it's got to be emotional, and it has to be in a narrative context. The second thing that I would emphasize is to make sure the hero of your story is the consumer. In a campaign, the consumer is the voter. In a business, it's the potential client or the potential customer. In traditional story analysis, the elements are characters, heroes and villains, a plot, the problem for which a solution is sought, a challenge, a critical choice that the hero confronts, and resolution, the solution to the problem and the consequence of the choice the hero makes. Randy analyzes that as a problem-solution dynamic. And throughout history, that structure has been a structure that also underlies effective storytelling. The problem in campaigns is that it's easy to identify the villain, it's the opponent, but too often they fail when it comes to identifying the hero by making the candidate the hero, when it should be the voter who's the hero. And so too in the business world, the hero is the client, the consumer. The problem has to be something which your product or services helps address. The challenge, the choice the hero confronts is to use your product or somebody else's, to buy your service or somebody else's. And the resolution is to make it possible for the consumer to see the solution being your what you're selling, and thus making that choice. And finally, being more granular, paying attention to the actual language and sequencing of a story, And there, I'd point to three elements. The first is using simple language. Candidates too often get into jargon, complex verbiage, legislativese, House Bill 32, Amendment 4B, stuff that no sensible human being should understand. And people who are too close to their own product or service, I suspect, make that same mistake all the time. The second it would be that the order of the presentation of story elements is crucial. If you've got something you want to persuade people about, you have to set the predicate so that when you go to make the close, they're ready to believe what you're saying. In campaigns, that's particularly true on the attack. Most pollsters test negatives by asking something like, well, if X were true, would it make you more or less likely to support a particular candidate? And if you don't set the predicate so that the voter finds a key attack credible, instead of saying, I wonder if that's true when you make the attack, they'd be more likely to say, I knew there was something wrong with that guy. So you have to make them suspicious before you go in for the kill. And on the positive side as well, you have to build to make the convincing case.
And that's what you mean by setting the predicate, setting the context of this.
I'll use a particular campaign in which the person had been found by the IRS guilty of collecting but not passing along to the government taxes on employees' earnings. Was fined a substantial amount. And we were able to make the case that he had stolen the money from his employees and not passed it along, and had been found guilty of so doing by the IRS. Well, if we had just led with that as the attack, the likely response of a voter would be, I wonder if that's true. I have no basis of knowing if it's true or not, no matter how much you might have a footnote or a citation to it. Instead, what we did was we had a series of pieces that attacked the candidate for misleading people about where he lived, about living in a city that was far away from the district. Not that was going to persuade them to vote against the guy. And in fact, you don't have to live in a district to run for Congress. You have to live in the state. But it was the state capital and very culturally distant from the district, as well as geographically distant. And that he's not one of us. That and we have photos of him in a tuxedo or out golfing and such. And he's not really one of us. And we made that case through a series of pieces that said so that when we got to the attack that truly moved the needle and persuaded people, which was the withholding of
the taxes.
The taxes. Mm-hmm. When we got to the tax hit, instead of saying, I wonder if that's true, people were more likely to say, I knew there was something wrong with that guy. I was right. He's not one of us.
They get to be a part of the story that way.
That's what we were trying to elicit, and indeed we won that campaign, and it was for a Democrat in a pretty red district.
So what is the third element then? You talked about simple language.
The third element finally is that presenting issues as bullet points in a campaign setting is a non-narrative form of communications, and it's not effective. On the business side of that, if all you're doing is presenting just specific factual and factual recitation of facts about your product or service, that may be awfully compelling to you because you love your product or service. Mm-hmm. But if that bullet point form of presentation is not particularly compelling narrative storytelling, as opposed to selling the benefit of those bullet points, present the Christmas tree, hang the benefits as ornaments off the Christmas tree, all of them driving people to the conclusion that boy, I need that because it delivers me this benefit. Mm-hmm. Not that it delivers me this feature, not that it delivers me this factual bullet point, but that it delivers me this emotional benefit that I need and want.
It's not what you make, but what you make happen in people's lives.
Precisely.
So, Dave, I'd like to finish off with a quote that you had in your article. And again, I direct you all to his February 9th article in Politico. And this came from the author of The Political Brain, Drew Weston, but I think it's so well said. Quote, "You can slog it out for those few millimeters of cerebral turf that process facts, figures, and policy statements, or you can take your campaign to the broader neural electorate, collecting delegates throughout the brain and targeting different emotional states with messages designed to maximize their appeal." A mouthful, a way of saying you can look for that little bit of space in the left brain, or you can appeal to the heart and the right brain through narrative and connect with people on their terms of how they actually learn. And that is that story processing brain, not a logic processing brain.
Precisely. And it goes back to the fact that storytelling has been the most effective form of communication throughout the entirety of human history. And it still is, and it's not likely to change anytime soon.
It's what makes us uniquely human, and what makes us, the leader of the pack. We survived all these years because we approach life and its problems through narrative structure, through story, not through bullet points and PowerPoints.
Precisely.
Dave, how can people learn more about you and the great work you do?
Well, our website, which is bouchardgold.com, BOUCHARDGOLD.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here on Business of Story. I truly appreciate it.
It's been fun.
And thank you all for listening to this edition. Come back next week when we'll have another fabulous story artist like Dave, who will help you craft and tell compelling brand stories that actually connect people and move them to action by using the one true superpower that we all possess, and that's the power of narrative, the power of story to move people. And if I can help you, if I can be of service to you, check me out at businessofstory.com. I've got a ton of tools there just waiting for you. You can learn how you can apply the ABT to your life, the foundation or the DNA of story, as Randy and I talk about. There's 10 steps, the story cycle process that can help you start getting your narrative structure pulled together, and then a whole host of examples of people using story to truly move mountains. So join me over at businessofstory.com. And if you like what you're hearing, please pop on over to iTunes and leave me a message, give me a rating. That just helps it share Business of Story with your world. So thanks for being here, and until next Monday, have a wonderful life.